What's up, guys? Heart Pirates TCG here. I'm giving you this video that I coach a lot of people on. If you guys have done my coaching and you are relatively newer to the game, or just, I figured this would be good for you to learn. I'm going to be teaching you in this video how, basically all the different classifications of decks, how they want to win, and kind of how to counteract that in a sense. And I'll explain it probably more in maybe another video. The reason I'm doing this video is because I've said this so many times that I feel like I'm kind of like I'd rather not talk about it again. So anyone that does my coaching from this point on, I'm going to refer them to this video to start out with, and then we'll talk about other things that stem from this video, because I've probably said this probably 50 times, so I've almost like memorized these slides. Like that's how much I've said this, but it's super important, right? It's very important. And if you don't know how to play against a lot of these decks, or like what their win condition is, then you're not going to be able to read game state very well. You're not going to understand when to counter. You're not going to understand a lot of things, because this is the foundation of One Piece, at least from what I believe. And I'm going to give you some specific examples in this video, and I'm going to do my best to give you real life applications as to me following my own advice, so I can show you how it turns out. So without further ado, let me go ahead and talk to you about this. And it is right here. So we have all of these classifications of decks. We have slow decks, and then we have fast decks, and then we have card advantage decks. And we'll explain all of them, and then we'll give you some specific examples of other things that I'll talk to you about, throughout the video. So if you guys want to like this video, comment down below if this was helpful for you, that would be great. If you want to sign up for my coaching, go to the Discord and go to the coaching stuff tab, and then obviously click on the Calendly app so you can book a time with me. And then also I sell playmats too, so check out the store channel. And then if you guys want to get a playmat, let me know. So without further ado, we have the slow decks, right? Now, slow decks are all different classifications of blue. They're variants of blue, they're variants of purple, and they're variants of black. Variants of yellow and variants of black, right? So pretty much all slow decks are one of these colors or a combination of those colors: yellow, black, and blue, right? And slow decks, they're slow decks because they basically spend all of their dawn playing characters that are either really big, or they wait a long time to develop a board, for a lot of dawn that can actually, do something, right? So for example, Crocodile is a deck that doesn't really get good until like 7 to 9 dawn. I would say probably 9 dawn, your Mihawk turn. Katakuri doesn't really get good until really like your 7 dawn turn. Sakazuki doesn't even really get good until probably 8 dawn, when you can Rebecca Hina Lucci. So these decks are very slow, and they don't pump out a lot of characters very often, right? It's usually just maybe like at most 2 per turn. Sakazuki is 3, but technically I'm not going to count Rebecca, so it's just Hina and Lucci. So all of these decks basically just play 1 or 2 characters at most per turn, which is a relatively slow deck, I would say, right? Nothing like Red Green Law or Zoro, or something like maybe even Red Purple Luffy, for example, that plays like big bodies but like multiple per turn. Those decks are a lot faster. So slow decks always lose to either aggro or removal, right? So if you think about it like this, Crocodile right here lost to aggro. Sakazuki loses to aggro. Katakuri loses to aggro. But decks like Rebecca and Crocodile and like Smoker, those all lost to removal, right? Smoker also lost to aggro too, which makes it the worst of both worlds. But the decks that play only 1 character per turn, or at most 2 characters per turn, they usually cannot beat decks that play multiple, because they can't keep up with the tempo, right? So for example, something like Crocodile, all it is getting rid of like 1 character per turn with, like, let's say a Zeph and a Sogeking and a Mihawk. It's just 1 character per turn, right? And then at most, if you use your leader effect, it's 2. If you're playing Nami and Dadan and Zoro and all of these characters per turn and like building a board, it's going to be really hard not only to get value, because I can't bounce any of your cards, but even if I bottom deck those cards, I'm not really getting a whole lot of value from these cards, right? Because I'm spending 9 Dawn to bottom deck a 1 cost or a 2 cost, and it just feels really bad. And then when you're using that Dawn, you can't actually fight for the board, right? You have to use all of your Dawn to be able to fight for or to play characters. So if they have any characters that are like 5k, it's very unlikely you're actually going to be able to kill them, because they can just 1k counter out of it, and then you're just playing on curve pretty much all the time. It's the same thing with Katakuri right here. Is Katakuri, it usually uses most of its Dawn to play characters, right? Or if not all of them, right? Like 3 Dawn, they're playing Parosparrow, and then 7 Dawn, they're playing Big Mom or, Enel. Then 10 Dawn, they're playing their Big Mom. So like it's very rare that they're actually going to have the Dawn to be able to fight for board. So, these decks, when you fill the board and you're able to just like keep putting pressure on them, it's going to be really hard for them to establish characters on the board, because they might want to actually just put Dawn on some of their characters to guaranteed get pressure off of them, so later on they can drop those characters. But if they do that, they're in a losing situation either way, because they're not playing toward to the strength of their deck. So those are decks that lose to aggro, right? But the decks that lose to removal, they do so either because their leader can't attack, right? Or, the characters that they get, they also spend pretty much the whole turn playing them, and they're not getting them really any value. Like Smoker, it can pop a card, whatever, but it's losing card advantage, and it's not really attacking for a whole lot, because it's usually just they're playing on curve and just killing things, right? Same with Crocodile. Crocodile is like, if they spend 9 Dawn playing Yamato and you remove the Yamato, they're not doing anything. All they're doing is gaining a life. And, you're usually not only, playing cards that get rid of their cards, but, you're not, I'm sorry, you're removing their cards, but you're also building to your board, so that 1 life they gain isn't really going to matter in the grand scheme of things, right? So that's why those decks lose to that, right? Katakuri is one of the few decks that uses a lot of Dawn to play characters that does not lose to removal, because of its characters massively, all of its characters massively impact the game on play. So something like 10 cost Big Mom or Katakuri or Yamato or 7 Lin, as VV Theory likes to call it, 10 Lin, 7 Lin. I think that's actually a really good name. Those characters already did their job, right? It's like killing rush characters, right? The characters already attacked. Like them staying on the board is a bonus, right? So, they don't lose to removal because they've already done what they need to do. And then them staying on the board, which it's still really hard to take them off the board, is just a huge bonus, right? It's hard to get the 10 cost Big Mom off the board. A lot of times you just have to chump block it. So that's why Cat, I said, loses to aggro and not removal, because Cat like massively impacts the game on play. Same with all rush characters. All decks that have a bunch of rush characters, they don't lose to removal because their characters already did their job. I'm hoping that makes sense. Let me know in the comments if it doesn't. I'll try to explain it as best I can, maybe in the comments. But to sum it all up, against slow decks, these decks, you need to put pressure on their hand or life size before they can take control of the game, or you will lose most of the time, right? So let me give you one example real quick, is against Sakazuki, right? Sakazuki is a deck that, if they have very little life or very little hand size, they're both bad positions to be in. So let me give you an example. If Sakazuki has 2 cards in hand, the odds of them having the cards that they need to actually to combo off and remove your bodies from the field are pretty low, because everything is a 2-card combo minimum, right? You have a Great Eruption and a Houndblaze, you have Rebecca and a Lucci, or Rebecca and a Hina, or you have, a Great Eruption and like a Borsellino, or something along those lines, right? It's not a 1-card answer. So if you put them at 2 cards in hand, not only are they, it's likely that they don't have the removal, but they also probably, their leader effect hinders too, because if they have like 3 cards in hand, they might discard something they need with their leader effect for something they might need even more. Like, I always say this, but like if Sakazuki has very few cards in hand, they might pitch like an Ice Age to try to find a Great Eruption, or I'm sorry, not a Great Eruption, a Houndblaze, and then they'll draw into like, I don't know, like a Kaido or like a 7-cost Borsellino, and they're like, this doesn't really help me, and I just got rid of a card I might actually use later on, because they don't have a lot of options. I have to discard maybe a good card to find a better card, and that's just a bad position to be in. This is one of the times where I actually will give you a specific example on why this is so important and why it's so good to basically get Sakazuki to either low life or low hand. So let me go ahead and pull that up. Okay. So this is one of the videos I posted, and I took Kaido to locals. And when I took Kaido to locals, I played against one of my friends, Ryan, who I think is a very good player. He's a very good Sakazuki player, and like literally like a few days before this, both him and I went to a case tournament in Orlando, and we both went 5-1 and got top 16. He got actually top 8 at this case tournament. His tiebreakers were a little bit better than mine. So this guy obviously is a knowledgeable Sakazuki player, and he's very, very good at the game. And right here, to give you some context about this video, he could not clear my Kaido the turn before. He only has 3 cards in hand. He has 3 life and 3 cards in hand. So like we said, we either put pressure on their hand or their life size, or we lose. So I played this Kaido, and since he wasn't able to kill it, the last thing that I want to do is give him cards from his life to be able to kill this Kaido. So I'm going to do what I'm going to ramp with Oni right here, and I'm going to basically do what I call a temporary starve, right? And a temporary starve, what this is I'm going to, for 1 or 2 turns, not attack his life, so I can establish characters on my board so I can get value from them, right? Because if I keep giving him cards this early on, he might actually be able to swing the tempo back in his favor by removing the Kaido, and now I only have 1 life. I'm pretty much just dead in the water if that's the case. So I'm going to do a temporary starve, and this is so big into Sakazuki that a lot of people don't realize. I'm going to go ahead and play this kid here, and I'm going to do a play that a lot of people don't really expect. I'm going to go ahead and Sheep's Horn, rest the Borsalino, activate Kid's effect to get the Dawn back, and I'm going to swing 10 at the Borsalino, and I'm going to swing 5 at the Hina, and then obviously I'm going to save 2 for Hell's Judgment. But what this does is, since he wasn't able to kill my Kaido last turn, it's very unlikely he's going to be able to kill my Kaido the next turn, especially if I don't give him any cards from hand. And like I said, Sakazuki with very few cards in hand is in a terrible position. So the last thing I want to do is give him more cards to be able to kill me. Now, I'm not saying you don't play, aggro into Sakazuki's life, but if you have them in the position where they have very few cards in hand, you can keep them in that position for 1 or 2 turns while you build a board and get value from your cards, and that way you're actually going to be able to establish a board that can be way more effective because it can stick to the board against Sakazuki. So that is a specific example about against these slow decks basically taxing their hand or their life, because even if they had I'm gonna bring this up one more time. I'm sorry, guys, but even if he had 1 life and 5 cards in hand, if I had this board, I can go really tall into his life, and he would either die, or he'd have to discard every single card from his hand to get out of those attacks, right? And that's still not a good position for him to be in, because if he had 5 cards in hand, it's unlikely he's going to get rid of a 9 cost and a 5 cost. Like, that's just not going to happen, right? Like, unless he has like double Ice Age, and double Ice Age and Rebecca Hinaluchi, that's 4 out of the 5 cards in hand that he has to have. So it's just unlikely that he's going to be able to do that. So I'm building a board to be able to beat him, basically. So that is a specific example of how to beat a slow deck, right? A deck that loses to either aggro or well, in this situation, Sakazuki loses to aggro, but you don't have to always go aggro into his life. You could go aggro into his characters, and then you will just put pressure on their hand size or their life size, whichever one they want to give you. And then if you put pressure on their hand size, you can temporarily starve them out of the game, so you can basically just kill them in 1 turn the next turn. Which, spoiler alert, is if you watch this video, this is actually what I did. Like, I literally just OTK'd him the next turn with this board, basically using my leader effect. So that is that, and then I'll go ahead and go on to the fast decks. All right, so we're moving on to the fast decks now, right? And there's 2 different classifications of fast decks. There's ones with absolutely no fucking card advantage, like the ones on the left right here, and then there's the one with all of the card advantage, which are the ones on the right. So I'll explain the ones on the left, and then I'll explain the ones on the right. So the ones on the left, you have Law, purple Law, you have Arlong, and you have Bello Betty. Those are just specific examples of decks that are fast decks that with no card advantage. And the reason they have no card advantage is because they all either they counter from hand, they play characters from hand. Bello Betty and Arlong, they trash characters to play triggers, and then obviously Arlong's effect lets you play an extra character from hand. Bello Betty's effect lets you trash a card to boost characters. Law, you're using cards from hand to counter, you're playing cards from hand, you're using cards from hand to reduce cards, and then you're also playing more cards from hand. The gist is, you're not, like, they're going to have very few cards in hand by like turn 3. They're going to have like 3 or 4 at best, right? And what you're doing is, if you're giving them cards, you're giving them 1 extra card every turn to be able to just kill you, right? Because they can't generate a lot of value on their own. Now, I know Law in the new set, with set 6 arriving, can play the new Reiju to help him draw 2, which will help him stabilize, right? It is a nice step in the right direction. But even then, they're still probably not going to have, like, a draw 2 is only going to get you so far, right? Because that, I mean, I'm telling you, like, that deck, like, just burns through cards, like, left and right, right? So these decks right here, if you keep giving them extra cards per turn, not only can they be triggers, but they can also just, you know, get what they need from their life to be able to advance their board state and kill you even faster. So the trick to beating these decks is to starve them out permanently, not a temporary starve that we talked about with Sakazuki, but starve them out permanently while you build a board, and then you basically kill them in 1 or 2 turns, right? And what you want to look out for Law, so I'll explain why for both the different decks actually, because Arlong and Bello are different because of the triggers. But for Law, what you do is you give them a bunch of cards at one time, because the cards that they get, they're not going to have the Dawn or the time to be able to use them effectively. So a lot of times they're actually going to have to use some of them as counter, right? And even if they don't use some of them as counter, they're not going to have the Dawn, and a lot of them don't have Rush. So like their characters just aren't going to have the time to be able to actually get the most use out of it. So you're giving them a bunch of cards that at the end of the day just don't do anything. They're just counters, right? That's like the best thing that they can do. And then, you know, at best, like they just, you know, play a bunch of characters that can't attack, and then you kill them the next turn. That's for Law, right? That's why you do it the way you do it. But for Arlong and Bello, it's a little bit different because they have triggers, right? And obviously, if you know about Enel, right, is you want to give them as little chance to let their triggers, you know, impact the game as possible, right? So with Bello Betty and Arlong, the reason you starve them out is because you want to get rid of the cards in their hand and take control of the board just like how you would do with Law. But you would do it so when you build a board, you can attack into their life and you can start playing around the triggers a little bit better, right? So let's say, for example, they have nothing on the board and you have 2 life and 1 blocker, right? You know for a fact that you can basically take 3 hits, right? It's 2 hits with your for your life, and then, you know, your blocker can block 1. So you can attack into them 3 times, and if they, or I'm sorry, 2 times, and if they trigger into 2 cards, then you're at your limit, right? You can stop attacking into their life, and you can just survive the next turn. And then after that, since they're only a 4 life leader, you have to do 2 life, and a lot of times they're not even attacking the characters that you have, they're attacking into your life. So most of your characters that attacked the previous turn are probably going to just be on the board still, and you can kill them the following turn because they're like, you're not worried about them killing you because they no longer have any ways of killing you on the crackback. So you can go all in with all of your characters that you already built your board for, and you could just pretty much just kill them, right? Now that you already starved them out of resources, now that you already cleared their board, you already get rid of their hand size, and you built a board, odds are you're going to be going for life with like 3 to 5 attacks, and they're going to have 2 cards in hand. So like they're going to need double beige and like 2 rad beams to get out of the attacks that you have, and it's just like it's just very unlikely, so it's just not going to happen. So yeah, that's how you beat the fast decks with no card advantage. Now we have the ones on the right, the ones with all of the card advantage. Now you can't starve these guys out of resources because they either draw from their life, or with Zoro, they just play a bunch of weenie characters that just replace themselves that have infinite value. Dodon gets a Nami, Nami gets a Zoro, Zoro gets, obviously doesn't get anything, but like it's just another card. So that's like 1 card gets them 3 cards, right? And Buggy gets a jet pistol, and then obviously there's a body that takes cards out of your hand, and then jet pistol takes away a body, whatever it is, right? So these guys, you can't starve them out of resources, which is why they've been so good for so long. Is the conditions to beating these decks is a lot easier said than done. Against red, you can't go down to 0 life unless you have like infinite counter, right? Against any deck that plays Diable Jambe, you can't go down to 0 life unless you have 15k in counter. Like you can get to 15k right off the bat. Against Newgate, you can't go to 0 life unless you have 12k in counter, right? You can go to 12 because Rush Luffy with 5 Dawn attached to him is 11k, right? So you have to be very careful on going down to 0 life into any red deck. So, you know, and same with Purple Luffy to an extent, is if you go down to 0, if you go down to very few life, their attacks only get taller for the rest of the game. And when their attacks get taller in the rest of the game, then it's going to be really hard to counter out of a 10k Kaido attack, right? Or like a 9k, the sumo wrestler guy. Those like, it's so hard to get out of it. And because you already took a lot of life early, you don't have a lot of buffers to be able to actually get out of those attacks. Like, you know, you're at like 2 life. the 9K and the 10K are probably connecting. Now they haven't used any Dawn. Like, those are just big characters. Now they have 10 Dawn to just wipe you. You know what I'm saying? It's really tough to actually get out of that. So the conditions to beating these decks is, like I said, easier said than done, but you have to build a board while also maintaining either a healthy hand or life size, and combating their board at the same time. So for example, Zoro, you want to put him in a position kind of almost similar to like how you would do Law, is you fight for board control and make sure you're at like either a healthy hand or life size, preferably both, which is, I know, very hard to do. And then you basically kill them in like 1 or 2 turns. That way, you know, they can't just like, you know, do the infinite value train with Dadan and Nami and Zoro and Luffy and all of that stuff. And, you know, the cards, it's very similar to Law. The cards that you give them, they won't have enough time to be able to get the most use out of them. So that's kind of how you kill Zoro, but you know, you can't starve them out of resources, so you just have to kind of fight for board control while also, like, I guess sometimes chipping away at their life. It's really hard to do. Against Newgate, you have to basically attack into their lead or their characters whenever they have life, and whenever they don't have life, you have to attack into their leader, because you want to force them to get rid of cards in their hand. You want to force them to react, and when you force them to react, they can't just let a character go and live to fight another day. You are forcing cards out of their hand, or they lose when they're at 0 life. But if you're attacking into their characters before they have anything, before they're at 0 life, then, you know, you are either clearing the board for free and obviously getting to your win condition, which is, you know, getting into the late game against Newgate, or they're taking cards out of their hand. And that's how you beat, obviously, Newgate right there. Purple Luffy, like I said, just build board while also, you know, fighting, you know, being healthy and, you know, somewhat good on the hand size. So like I said, easier said than done. Some decks just literally don't have the ability to do it, which is why, you know, some decks just auto lose to some of these. But if there is a theory to beating them, it's that, right? Of course, every deck has specific like examples of what you can do, but this is more generalities, because, you know, when you're having every deck is a little different, so every deck's gonna have like some combos or something like that are good into, I guess, one version, or I guess one thing possibly into these decks. But obviously, since, you know, I don't know what deck you have in mind, I can't talk about all of them. So too long didn't read, right, is starve these guys out of resources and then kill them in 1 or 2 turns. These guys don't take a lot of life early on, and then try to basically fight for board control and maintain a healthy life and hand size, or hand size. So then we move on to the card advantage decks. So the card advantage decks are also really good, right? Which is why they've all either won a nationals or won treasure cups or regionals, or sometimes multiple of all of them, right? So obviously Law's won plenty of treasure cups and regionals. Doflamingo won a regional, and I think he's topped multiple times in set 1. Obviously Doflamingo won a regional Awaken TCG. I don't know if it was a regional or a treasure cup, but he won with green purple Dofi back in set 4. And now obviously just won Nats. Newgate, we don't even have to talk about Newgate. So these decks are all really good. And the reason that they're good is because they're card advantage decks. I know we talked about Whitebeard being a fast deck, but it's also a card advantage deck, which is funny. And, you know, card advantage decks want to run you low of resources and make it mathematically impossible to protect anything on board and win through pure advantage. So believe it or not, all these decks actually play a little bit different. So I'm going to explain some of them. The general idea to beating them is to fight for card advantage, right? And don't let them outvalue you too much. And sometimes it means letting them attack into your life rather than resting your characters. But I'm going to give you specific examples, because some of these decks are actually different and you have to play around them differently, because their method of winning is a little bit different. But I'll start out with actually Enel. So Enel is a deck that when it has 1 life, it technically has 3 life. It has its leader effect life, it has its last hit, and then it has its the life it already has, right? So that is Enel. If you want to even consider killing them, you have to have a board of 3 attacks. And if they have 8 cards in hand, you're never getting through, ever. In a million years, you're not killing them, especially because one of those attacks, one of those lives could be a trigger, right? And then even if it's not a trigger, they'll just counter out of one of them. They have a ton of cards in hand. So to even consider killing them, you have to have either a bunch of attacks, or you have to have not a lot of attacks, but they don't have a lot of cards in hand. So the best way to do that into Enel, to get cards out of their hand, is to, every time that they turn a character sideways, you swing into it to force them to get cards out of their hand, because later on in the game, when you're going for game, if they have a ton of cards in hand rather than just 2 to 3, it's a lot harder for your attacks to actually pierce through, and you're not going to have the Dawn to get all of your characters super tall, unless you're playing like Blurple Kaido or something like that, where all of your characters are just naturally tall. But most decks don't have access to stuff like that. So, you know, they'll just take the ones that they, you know, don't feel like countering out of, like the 9Ks, and then they'll just counter out of the 7 super easily, and then there you go, you're just dead because you can't kill them once again. So if you can fight for board control while also only attacking into their rested characters, with something like Sakazuki, for example, just attacking into their rested characters until you develop a board, that's the best way of being able to kill them. But decks like Purple Luffy, the reason that they kill Enel so quickly is because they flood the board with like 6k attacks, and they just keep going into your life for like 6 or 7k pretty much every time. And the whole time that they're playing characters, like they're just not big enough to actually deal with Purple Luffy's characters, and then they'll just kill them because like they're gonna get you to very little hand size a different way. Instead of starving you out, they're gonna make you just discard a ton of cards so you don't take a bunch of life early on. And then obviously you know, whenever they do play their Yamato to heal, it's just 1 life, and you still have like 5 characters on board that are swinging 6 or 7k pretty much every single turn, and you'll just kill them from there. There's basically 2 different ways: is you aggro them super heavily to get them to discard cards, or you fight for board control if you're a little bit of a slower deck, and then just starve them out of resources and then build a board while they starve out of resources. So that's Enel, right? Then you have, we already talked about Newgate, right? You just have to fight for board control. And then usually 8 is the magic number, because if you swing 8, it pretty much forces them to use like an event from hand, or to get rid of 2 cards from their hand straight up. And there's only so many events that they have, right? They can only guard point or rad beam out of so many cards until they start using 2Ks and 1Ks. And then that's how you start connecting, right? Swing 8s into Newgate when they have no life. And then we'll talk about, I guess, relevant right now is Law. Law will always be relevant. We'll talk about Law, right? Law is a deck that's really hard to beat. But if you have there's ways to beat Law that people don't get. And I'll kind of explain it to you why that is Law will take its first 2 life for free to be able to get resources to just basically get the most out of its deck, right? They'll take the 2 life and it'll be like either a 2k counter or like a searcher or like a blocker Law, and then they'll just infinitely loop those characters while those characters get even more characters for counter or like attacks or whatever it is. Like it's just the value train is just outrageously good, right? So what you do against Law is, if you have removal, you build a board, you temporarily starve them out of the game, right? And you build a board, and then you, in 1 turn, clear their board with some removal, like a Fire Fist or like a Lucci or something along those lines, and you swing a ton at the same turn. Let me give you a specific example. I played this guy in a Treasure Cup. I don't have the video for this, but this guy blew me out of the water. He was playing Zoro, and I was playing Law, and this dude legit would just play a ton of characters and not turn any of them sideways, and except for his buggy and his leader, and he would attack me with buggy and leader because I had no way of getting rid of the buggy for at least at that time, because I didn't have any vistas, and I didn't have any characters that stuck on the board that didn't have slash. So he would just keep poking me with his leader and his buggy to like either do life or take cards out of my hand, or, you know, get me to block. And he would play characters and not attack with them and leave them active. And he forced me to basically attack into his life over and over and over again to give him cards to be able to fuel his offensive prowess, right? Is I would attack into his life and I'd give him like a Fire Fist, and I'd attack into his life and I'd give him a Zoro, and I'd give him a Marco, yada yada yada. And then when he finally had a board that he felt comfortable attacking with, he Fire Fisted both of my blockers, and then he swung 7 to life, 7 to life, 7 to life, 7 to life, and I literally, bro, I pretty much just died right then and there, right? I had 2 life left, and he swung 7. I had to block with my last blocker. He swung 7 again. I took it. He swung 7 again. I 2K'd out of it as well as a 1K. He swung 7 again, 2K and 1K. And then I had literally 0 life and 3 cards in hand at the end of it, because I literally just couldn't stop his tempo at the same. Like he blitzed me, bro, like straight up, just like wiped my board clean, and then attacked for like tall numbers and efficient numbers for really wide board sets. So he just crushed me, right? But that's if you have removal. Some decks don't have removal. The decks that don't have removal, something like if you're playing a Nell and you're going into a Law, a lot of times what they'll do is they don't want to attack into your life and give you cards because they want to out resource you, right? They want you to turn your character sideways to not only give them cards, but then when you turn your character sideways, they're going to just attack into them a bunch of times for 5Ks, or like, you know, play Otama and then make them 3Ks or 4Ks, whatever it is, and swing into them super efficiently. And eventually they're going to get to a point where they out resource you, and then they're going to kill you. So a lot of times the best answer to beating Law is, you know, if you have a character that's kind of valuable that you think is going to just die to an Otama or like multiple 5 or 6K attacks, let them attack into your life source, build a board, and then go wide for like, at the same time, very similar to the other guy did, 7 at life, 7 at life, 7 at life, 10 at life, you know, if you're playing like Rush Kaido or something like that. And, you know, you're going to be able to basically blitz them. And sometimes if you temporarily starve them out of resources, they might not have the best board state. They might have like, let's say a blocker law and like maybe one blocker, but like, you know, their hand probably isn't fully formed at that point. So you can take control of the game and you can do a lot of life, or you can take a lot of cards out of their hand, sometimes both. And that's kind of how you beat Law. Is like, don't, if you're worried about them just like running you out of resources, let them attack your life a couple times while you build a board. That way you're not just like getting all of your characters like taken one by one by an Otama that they keep recycling back. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if let me know if you guys, if this makes sense to you. But to sum it up, you know, pretty much all of these decks, you can't let them out resource you. Sometimes you have to use your life as a resource, and sometimes it's better to leave your characters active so they don't just keep constantly swinging into them and getting cards out of your hand. That way you just can't like just like you can protect your characters later on in the game and you can build a board. You know, some decks are a little bit different in certain aspects, but most decks that are card advantage decks, you fight for board control, similar to like decks like almost like Green Uta to an extent, right? Like Green Uta, there's no way to really like fight. There's no way to really out resource them because they just have so many cards and so much card draw between Nami and their leader effect. Sorry about that, but you can get them to a point where they're low enough to like you can take control of the board, and then you can, you know, start swinging at their life and really kind of like start putting them under pressure, right? And that's a deck that also struggles with 2Ks, the Green Uta. So, you know, a lot of times if you're swinging for like 6K, like they're gonna have to discard 2 1Ks to save it, and then obviously that's when you can start out resourcing them. You're not gonna do it completely because they just have so many cards, you know, card draws per turn, but you can do your best, and then obviously you can take control of the board and limit their hand size. Don't have, you know, they won't have 9 or 10 Dawn at their disposal. So that's that. So all of that is to say, once you understand what these decks want to do, you will understand the game state better, and you will understand how to play into these decks to put them in that game state where they start losing, right? All of these decks, we explained how they win and how they lose, right? Is, you know, these guys just want to slow down the game and kill you with big bodies or removal. These guys want to kill you as fast as possible. These guys want to out-resource you. Once you understand that, you will understand, okay, if Enel wants to out-resource me, I'm not going to let them do that. I'm not going to give them cards. I'm going to starve them out in certain decks, or I'm going to go very aggro and make them discard a bunch of cards with other decks, and you will put them in a position where they have 1 life and 3 cards in hand. You can start playing your game to put them in these positions depending on what deck you're playing. And then Sakazuki, the same thing I showed you about in this video right here, is if they have 4 life and 2 cards in hand, they're in a bad position. I actually, what's funny is I made this slide before I actually played this game. I made this slide like probably like a month and a half ago, and I found myself in the same exact position 3 weeks ago, according to this video's timestamp, of this guy having 3 cards in hand and 3 life. So it's very similar to, you know, the condition I met. So what I did was I just temporarily starved them. And I understood because they had very few cards in hand, they were in a bad position. And because they were in a bad position and I recognized it, I was able to actually play into it a lot better and understand what to do in that situation because I understood Sakazuki was in a bad spot. If you don't understand they're in a bad spot, you're going to keep thinking they're just going to have removal for everything, and you're going to keep trying to rush them down when all you're doing is basically giving them cards to be able to kill you. So same thing with Purple Luffy, right? Purple Luffy with 3 Dawn and, you know, I'm sorry, 3 life, 7 Dawn and nothing on the field. They're in a bad spot because they're a deck that wants to kill you as fast as possible with tempo. And if you remove everything that they have efficiently, then they're not going to be able to fight for. They're not going to be able to fight for tempo and be able to kill you. And Purple Luffy has almost no late game. It's just straight up playing a bunch of 5 costs. So if you have a deck that has a late game and you're able to fight for board control into Purple Luffy, you just automatically win if they have a clear board, right? It's just like straight up so simple. Same thing with Bella Betty. If they have no characters on the board, they're just dead in the water. So same thought process goes into countering. As you read the board state, this deck wants to do blank, right? Like I said, if they have 1 life and 5 cards in hand, I'm sorry, this I overstepped. So if you're not worried about dying and you have the option between attacking into a Hina or attacking into their leader, both are 5K, you want to force them to react, right? If you're not worried about the Hina, you know, killing you, you attack into their life, because if you attack into their life for 7k, they have to either go down to 0 life or go to 3 cards in hand, and both of which are not ideal. Like I said, if they go down to 3 cards in hand, they can't really have a lot of cards to remove your board, most likely. But if they go to, sorry, that was the thumbnail. But if they go to 0 life, it's still not a good position to be in, because one, you know, Diable Jumble or one attack gets through, they're done, right? One big attack that gets through that they're not expecting, they're dead in the water. So it's not ideal. Same thing with Enel, is I need 3 characters on board to potentially kill Enel. Should I counter early to save my characters? If you realistically have game next turn, yes. But on the vice versa, should I go down early to protect the early in life, or I'm sorry, early in the game to like 4 cards in hand to protect my characters? No, because Enel is a card advantage deck, and if they out resource you, you can't keep your characters to lethal them in the future. So if you have 4 cards in hand on turn 2, or I'm sorry, on let's say turn 3, by turn 8, whenever you're trying to go for a game, if you turn your character sideways the turn before you go for game, and like when you're setting up lethal, the odds of you keeping those characters on the board are just they're non-existent, because you're probably gonna have even less cards in hand at that point, and they're all dead, and now your push to lethal is just done. Last thing is, do I take early life against Purple Luffy? Most likely no, because obviously Law will rip the cards out of your hand, and then also their attacks get bigger for the rest of the game. Counter what you can now, and then take the ones you can't. I'm not saying counter every 5 or 6k attack, but within reason, counter the 5 or 6k attacks, because when they start swinging for 7s and 10s, you're gonna regret not countering out of a 6 or a 5. So that is that. That is that. If you guys want to sign up for my coaching, like I said, go ahead and join the Discord, and then go to the coaching stuff tab, and you know, book a time with me through Calendly. Yeah, I think this video is great. Obviously, I do this when I coach, and I kind of talk about this like individually and answer any questions you have. But I wanted to make this just because like I'm kind of I don't want to talk about it every single time I have a new student that I coach. So I feel like this is just good for everybody to refer back to if you have any questions, and we'll work on other things beside this, because this is a lot to talk about, and sometimes my voice hurts after coaching all day. So I feel like this is good practice in general to kind of understand like what these decks win conditions are, and once you understand that, it just makes the game a lot easier. And there's a lot of other stuff that we can talk about that stem from this, but you have to understand the foundation of One Piece, which I think this is the foundation of One Piece, and then you start stemming into like, you know, branching off into the things that actually are more, I would say, more advanced, right? Is because you understand the basics of what decks are trying to do, at least the concept of the types of decks want to do, and then you move on to, okay, because this deck wants to do this, that's when I can start like disrupting their plays, or I can start countering with certain cards because these cards are dead and these cards are live, and mulliganing for certain hands. And it's all stems from this. It's like a cause and effect. So yeah, let me know if you guys like this video. I put a lot of work into this video, so if you guys want to subscribe, like the video, comment for the algorithm, that would be great. I'm so close to 7,000 subscribers, so yeah, that's dope, man. I'm one of the biggest One Piece YouTubers now, and I couldn't be more blessed. I really couldn't. I've seen so much growth in such a short time with this channel that for me it's almost unbelievable. Like I look at my channel, I'm at like 6720 right now, and I'm like, damn, like 6720, like I felt like just yesterday I had 3,000, right? And just the day before that I had 1,000. And yeah, it's just been great, man. I've been getting so much great feedback, and we have so many people in our Discord now. I think we have over like 2,200 people in our Discord. So obviously not all of them are talking at the same time. That'd be fucking crazy, right? But it's just been great, man. So thank you guys so much for everything. It's been great. You allowed me to do this full time. Obviously your continued support would just be great. Whether it just be views, obviously for YouTube revenue, or donations, or YouTube subscriptions, or coaching, or buying my playmat, whatever it is, it's all super helpful for me, and it allows me to keep making videos like this. It allows me to keep coaching. It allows me to keep taking a lot of time to put this all together, because this is really hard to kind of like put into words, right? Like this took me probably hours to kind of put together and really like figure out if this is really what I want to say and teach people. So yeah, I was able to do that because you guys have been supporting me. So I'm gonna stop blabbering now. I'm gonna stop yapping. But much love to you guys, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.